afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. It really, really is. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm one of the people that escaped from OAC. No, I don't think it is it?
You can take the man out of OAC.
You can't take OAC. And that is so true, actually. That is so true. But no, I just want to say right at the outset, at the very, very beginning, I'm really grateful to come back and to speak amongst you. I've done it a few times over the years, but I am eternally grateful for OAC and how it got me going as an evangelist, because there weren't and aren't that many organisations that get people going as evangelists, that take risks on people. And I think OAC has done that and still continues to do that, hopefully. So it is a real honour, genuinely. This is not preacher speak. You know, like when we all say we're really pleased to be here, but we're not. So you'd see right through that because you do it, all right? But I am genuinely thrilled to be here. And I want to share with you over the course of these two sessions just some stuff really that has really shaped who I am as an evangelist. Has really shaped how I'm trying to help Elim churches. I've got 550 churches in Elim that I've got to help with their evangelism. So I do that on Mondays and Tuesdays. And then have the rest of the week off now. But I do genuinely want to say, if it hadn't have been, and I mean this honestly, if I get a chance, there'll be one or two things you might see that I'm deliberately mentioning that will feed back into some of the stuff that I learned when I first started out. One or two of you will remember me from January 1987, when I came down and I was disgusted by the way Pete Hodge was behaving in a prayer meeting, and some things don't change. I think I speak on behalf of us all, and he's a little bit proud about that, aren't you, as well? But I genuinely am so grateful for the foundation that was built into me, and the gift of the communicator that was really developed through the work of OAC as we later became known. So I just want to say to you, I'm thankful, and I know some of you weren't here then, but as an organisation, I'm really thankful, and I'm really grateful to the Lord that I started out my work as an evangelist with OAC. And even though I moved on because God nudged me and led me in different ways, a lot of what I teach about evangelism, the foundations of what I learned in my training. And I've tweaked and developed them a little bit and made them my own and given some of my own insights to put them into a book to sell back to you. Which is almost genius when you think about it, isn't it? Some people need to be commended. So some of you will buy the book, you go, I teach this stuff, but there is some new stuff in there as well. So let me mention some of the resources early on. I haven't brought everything out because I don't really want to spend forever just talking about the resources I produced. But I will just mention one or two which I think might help you a little bit. So this book here, Big Yes, Little Yes, Healthy Maybe, a new framework for evangelism. I a long time been frustrated by the fact that we'd see people come to Christ. And I have to say, in my early days, when I was an angry young evangelist, in my early days, I'd say things like, and some of you may have said that historically, and I might like a little bit of challenge here, but I hope you're not saying it now, that I used to say, if you're not saying yes to God, you're saying no. I used to say that, and then I grew up. Because I realised that just because somebody's not saying yes, they're not automatically saying no. And it set me on a journey because, do you know what? Some people might be saying, maybe. But if the only option we give them in our evangelistic preaching is yes or no. They're not in a place to say yes. They're going to potentially say no. Like double glazing salespeople on the streets. You've got to get it now. And actually, if they'd say to you, I've asked them, oh, well, I'm actually quite interested. Can I take it? No, it's now. And so you end up saying no, don't you? Because it's not that you're against it necessarily, but it's that you want to think it through. You want to process it through. So I'm going to chat a little bit around that today and maybe just throw some stuff out to get us thinking about that. Part of what I wanted to do today is help you to understand what I'm doing with some, not just Elim churches, because I get a chance to do a few things with other churches as well. What I'm trying to do with them in terms of helping them to set a healthy culture of evangelism. Because I think OAC has got some great resources and people who can help churches with their evangelism culture. But I think there needs to be a few tweaks and a few changes and a few different glasses to look through. So what, if it's okay with you, I'm going to throw a little bit out that might challenge you a little bit. Is that all right? Yeah. I mean, you might as well say, yeah, because I'm going to do it anyway. And I think actually, I don't think it'll challenge you massively, because I think actually your heart will be along these things. But I think there's a frustration amongst evangelists that the church isn't interested in evangelism. I want to tell you a different story. It's not true. They are, but they're just not interested in our particular style of evangelism. And so I kind of want to explore lots of that stuff. So this book, Big Yes, Look Yes, Healthy Maybe, is about helping us to understand the journey biblically, what's going on in a person, and also then some practical stuff as well. So that's that book, and they're all for sale. You can pay by cash, card, phone, or watch. But it's got to be a smartwatch, because somebody tried to pay with a Casio 199 watch the other week. It was noticeable it was a certain age demographic, that's all I'm saying. But he was waving his 199 watch from the petrol station. So it has to be a smartwatch, okay? So that's that book. How do we meaningfully engage with people on a journey, and how you can help churches to do that, and the people that you equip and train. So we're going to explore a little bit about that today. And then this is a little book I wrote, just a quick answers to the most frequently asked questions. It's like a starter for 10. I'm sure many of you are quite good on that stuff, but if you just kind of want to get a little bit better equipped at that. This faith book, this is a guide to sharing your faith with people from other faiths. We look at the most sort of common, I think it's about 13 religions and cults that are around the UK. And what I've done is I've taken basically the gospel issues and looked at what a Mormon believes about the afterlife, or what a Jehovah's Witness believes about the afterlife, and what they believe about Jesus, a little bit about their history. So that's that book. You can get that. And then these 3 books here, I haven't brought these in with me. If you really want them, let me know. But I've damaged my back, and so I'm struggling to carry stuff, even though Alan very kindly helped me in. But these books, this book I wrote, Is It Possible? Maybe. This is to gently nudge the atheist to consider there could be a God. Or people who've said, oh, it's not for me. It's not for me. I often find when I get in conversation with them that the thing that's not for them is the thing that's not for me too. Do you find that? What's not for you? Well, sometimes I'll say, well, Christianity, what you are, what do you think I am? And then they'll tell you what they think you are, and I say, funny enough, that's not for me either. So is it possible? Maybe. And then this book here I wrote to help people explore the Christian faith. It's a real exploration of the gospel, essentially. And then this book here I wrote for people who've just said yes to God. Or what I'm finding more and more these days, that people who've just said yes to God and are very close to saying yes to God can be in a similar place. And so this book helps them as well, i.e. they can be belonging, they could be maybe reading the Bible a bit, praying a little bit. And so those last 3 are rammed full of testimonies and ways that people can go online. Now, those last 3 books might be books would less be books that you would buy to use on the streets, because it works out quite expensive, doesn't it? So they might be books that you might read and use them to resource yourself, but also maybe give away to some of your friends. Because I hope, little challenge here, I hope that you're not just doing evangelism professionally, for want of a better phrase. I hope that you're doing it with your friends and your neighbours as well. That's quite important. But what I did do is I did write, do you remember the word tract? Do we still use those words? So we've got a lot of Elim churches that are starting to go back out on the streets. And I've been having a conversation with Stephen, because I genuinely, one of the reasons why I want to share a lot of what I'm sharing today is because I want something from you as an organisation who I trust. And that is, we've got a lot of Elim church. I'm going to be really frank with you. We've got a lot of Elim churches doing open air work, and it's very shouting at people and claiming. It's a thing that's called decisionism, which is where it's predominantly about getting people to make a decision. But it's not a decision that is a decision that people understand that they're making. And in my kindest moments, I think something's happening and I think we're over-interpreting. In my unkind moments, I think we're forcing people to make decisions. Not we, and I know this is not what OAC would do, because I've got the teaching slides, okay, and I use them. We want to make sure people haven't been forced into becoming Christians, don't we? And sometimes there's an inherent weakness in that sometimes we don't take bold steps and invite people to follow Christ. So it's getting the balance right with it, isn't it? That's the thing. So I wrote this little leaflet for our churches, and I think this might be more along the lines of something that you might find useful. Now, it's different to Turn to God. Are you still using Turn to God? Which is far superior to this, but it's a different leaflet. This is what I call light apologetics, medium gospel. This is, for me, it's all about getting into a journey with people, a conversation with people. You know that statistic that says 85% of people or thereabouts become a Christian because a friend invites them? You've heard of it. It varies a bit. Sometimes it's 80%, sometimes it's 85%, and 32% of all statistics are made up on the spot anyway. But what that does tell us is the vast majority of people become Christians because of a friend. So that's the primary application of that statistic. I think there's a secondary application of that statistic that we miss. And that's, I think, why it's really good that a lot of OAC evangelists, they go out at a similar time. I don't know whether you still do that, but I remember we'd go out at a certain time on a certain day, and you get to meet people that you see regularly, because people are creatures of habit, aren't they? And so for me, the secondary, and I think no less important application, is that all evangelism works best when it's relational. Isn't it? We're not one-hit wonders, are we? All evangelism works best when it's relational. And so I created this leaflet, and genuinely, I'm not just saying that because Pete's here and he's a mate. This leaflet is really aimed at opening people up to have a conversation. So some of you will have seen this before. Imagine that circle there contains the knowledge of the whole world. I want you to put a dot in there that best represents your knowledge. And so they put a little dot. And so you say to the person, so you can see that dot represents everything that you know about, and everything outside of that dot is now everything that you don't know about, but is true. Everything you don't know about, but it's real. You would be foolish to say it doesn't exist just because you have no knowledge of it. So is it possible that God does exist, that Jesus did die, and that it is all true, but you just don't know about it? And then on the back, that little bit there, I introduced people to big yes, little yes, healthy maybe. So let me take you through that a little bit. We haven't got into the main stuff. This is all part of this bit. I was on the way back from London on the train, and I was having this conversation with this lady opposite, and we were eye-rolling because we were in the quiet compartment where you're meant to be quiet. You can talk, but it's quiet. And there were some people who weren't being quiet in the quiet carriage. I know, it's shocking, isn't it? And do you find yourself looking at them and giving them the look? Trying to communicate through the airwaves to them. And it's a little bit like when people jump in front of the queue, when you're queuing and they come in front of you. Do you stare at the back of their head? I just hope they don't turn round seeing you doing it, don't you? Of course, you're all much more godly than me and exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. So we were eye-rolling, and we connected over an eye roll. And once the people had sort of exited, and we just sort of chit-chatted a little bit and got into conversation. And she was like some marketing consultant. And so she was telling me what she did. And she said, oh, what do you do? I said, well, and I don't know what you're doing, I'm always trying to find ways that whilst it's not quite true what I am doing, I don't mean I'm lying. Let me just caveat that. I'm not lying. What I'm trying to do is, how can I say what I'm doing in a way that that person will understand? You know, because if you say you're an evangelist, you know what's going to happen, don't you? So I said to her, funnily enough, I'm in a similar role and in a similar line of work to you. She said, oh, what sector? So I said, it's in the faith sector. She said, oh, I'm intrigued. I said, well, you know what it's like. Part of marketing is trying to change the perspective of the people so that they at least will be interested in what you're offering them when they don't really want it. Yeah, exactly. So I said, well, I do something very, very similar, only I've created this framework, and it's an invitational framework that allows people to be able to buy in without having to throw themselves, oh, tell me more, she said. So I said, well, I've got this framework called Big Yes, Little Yes, Healthy Maybe. Big Yes is about helping people to fully commit to becoming a Christian. And I briefly explained what that was. I said, Little Yes is about helping people to make an intentional decision to find out more, to explore. I have become more and more convinced that we have to get better at helping people to explore the Christian faith. And not just Alpha. Alpha's fantastic, by the way. I'm a big fan of Alpha. But Alpha starts with Jesus. And not everybody's at the place where they can start to consider Jesus. You know that. You have the conversations on the streets, don't you, with people. So we've got to find lots of ways at helping people to explore. And then I said, that's Little Yes. And then Healthy Maybe is a gentle nudge to challenge people to become open-minded about God. Because lots of people say they're open-minded, but they're not really that open-minded when it comes to the Christian faith. And so therefore, they're open-minded within a very narrow view. So I said, that's not really open-minded at all. And she said, no, I get your point. So I said to her, so which are you? I said, are you big yes, little yes, or healthy maybe? And she said to me, I'm at least a healthy maybe. I said, oh, tell me why. Because I believe in asking the question. Some of you are doing this all the time. Tell me why. I said, that's amazing. I said, what would it take for you to go from healthy maybe to little yes? And she said, I don't know really. I suppose I don't know. I said, well, what stops you? She said, I guess I probably just don't know what I need to do. So I said to her, well, I think I might be able to help you. Would you be interested? She said, yes, I would. I'd be really interested. So I said, if you're up for it, let's meet up. So I said, but I'll need to bring a friend with me because you've got to be sensible, haven't you? You've got to be wise. And so I met with her. She's not become a Christian yet, but I met with her and we explored and she moved on a little bit. So I really believe in the journey, and I wonder, and we're going to explore the journey in a few moments' time. I'm going to do it through sort of stories, scriptures, and then some practical stuff. But what I want to do is just, if I may, and if I may not, I will, I'll just gently nudge you a little bit. So in your evangelism, whether it's your personal evangelism, or in your, if I might put it out there, on the front line evangelism, how are you helping people who are not ready to say a big yes to God, not ready to become Christians? How are you helping them to explore? How are you doing your best to actively create journey? What resources, what things have you got? Are you only hitting it at the say yes? Or are you giving people an opportunity to explore? What does that look like for you in your context? I'm not necessarily going to give you lots of answers for that because I'm not the expert in open air work. You are the experts. And if you're not an expert, there's no hope for the rest of us, okay? Because you're the folks out there doing it. So if you don't feel you're an expert, just pretend you are, okay? Because, well, you know what an expert is, don't you? X is a has-been and a spurt is a drip under pressure. So maybe we can all be that, to be fair. But how can you begin to help people on the journey that you meet in the open air? Or I know it's a little bit limited in schools, but in the other contexts. And so this little leaflet here, okay, would be the sort of thing you'd have to get into conversations. And the gospel's in here, but it's not a real big gospel share. You'd need to use this with Turn to God or something like that. I brought some with me. If you want to buy some at the end, then by all means come and get some. They are 100 for 25, so they're 25p each. Is that the right sums? Yeah, 25p each. If you want to get some, that's a little extra OAC discount. If you want to get some, let me know. If you're absolutely skint and can't afford anything, let me know, and Pete will pay for you. No, genuinely, if finance is an issue, just let me know and I'll give you some. It's not a problem, okay? I'm not in it to make money. I'll find some other way to feed the children. That's not something you need to worry about. That's my pressure. That's my worry. That's my therapy sessions. Now, genuinely, if finance is an issue, then please let me know, and you're more than welcome to take some. So that's a little bit about the resources that are just out there, and hopefully they'll help you a little bit. So I'm going to tell you some stories, and then these have come from my main bread and butter as an evangelist with all of our churches. Is I've got two elements. I probably spend 50 to 60% of my time equipping the church. And that's in all sorts of ways. That's writing articles, that's producing film series, that's writing books, that's sessions and seminars. So that's equipping the church and evangelists to get better. And probably about 40% these days is actually preaching the gospel because, you know, Ephesians 4 tells us we've got to equip. So I'm really excited by that, and I love doing that. And what I do for a lot of our churches is I help them to put on events in churches, because events still really, really are effective ways at reaching people with the gospel. And I'm in a Churches Together group where heads of mission and evangelism for different denominations, we all get together. And everybody's reporting that the numbers are back up in terms of people coming to church and in terms of events being successes again. So events are something that you could all speak at very easily, because you can hold a crowd on the streets. And I maintain if you can hold a crowd on the streets, you can hold a crowd anywhere, quite frankly. So we help them with their events. But one of the things that we do with events is we either only have an event that is like so light touch but no gospel, or full-on gospel. So what I do is I help churches to build a rhythm of evangelism through events. And I talk about the fact that these events supplement your evangelism, not replace it. And events can be really helpful because, for a number of reasons. Number one, they can help your friend who's not a Christian hear the gospel in a way that maybe you can't share. for two reasons. Number one, you might not be as skilled and as gifted at sharing it, but also proximity. Sometimes when you're really close to a person, it becomes hard to share the gospel for quite a lot of people because they don't want to upset, they don't want to offend, and they walk that tension so often. So events are great for that. But I think probably more exciting than all of that, I think like events allow people to just meet other Christians. And I'll let you be the judge of whether you want your friends to meet your Christian friends. But let's pretend that you do, okay? But it helps. And I think faith exploration is best done in community, isn't it? Best done in community. So events are really, really good. And I've had the privilege and joy of seeing people move from being atheists, so a big no person, to becoming a big yes person. And it's taken 8, 9, 10 years of working with these churches. So I want to tell you a few stories about a few people from different backgrounds and different settings. Let me tell you about, I deliver a thing called Reason to Believe. Reason to Believe is an apologetics course. So we cover things like, is it reasonable to believe in a God of love in a world of suffering? You know, that type of stuff. And I got to the end, and one of the things on the last night, is it reasonable to believe that Christianity is right? And basically what I do is I talk about Jesus' birth, life, death, and resurrection. Because Christianity isn't right because Christianity is right. Christianity is right because Jesus is right. Are you with me on that? Jesus is right, isn't he? He's the one that's right. And Christianity is the only religion, for want of a better phrase, that actually understands, teaches, seeks to live by and celebrate who Jesus is. So what I do is I say to people, well, let's have a look at the person of Jesus, decide whether he's right, because if he is right, then you have to become a Christian. So that's the land on the final night. And a little plea here. Imagine if you met me at my funeral. How could you make a judgment about what I was like as a person if you'd only met me at my death? And I think increasingly we need to introduce people to Jesus, not just his death. Now, don't not talk about his death, but let's introduce people to the person of Jesus. That's why we need to get better at learning some of the Bible stories and some of the gospel stories. So that's a little bit of a plea from me, is let's make sure that we're introducing people to Jesus, not just his death. Because I'm sure you've heard evangelistic preaching where people talk about his death, but they leave him dead. They don't bring him back alive. Or they don't even know anything about his life when they've listened to this person of Jesus. And I think one of the great things about thematic evangelistic preaching, which a lot of us do, we take a theme, don't we? Because that's the attention and the interest. Do you remember that verse, Deuteronomy 31:12? Are you still using it? Still a great verse. I still use it. It infuses and informs everything that I do from an evangelistic perspective, whether it's seeking to build a strategy for a denomination or whether it's seeking to preach a gospel message. I use that. So the theme gets the attention. And so it's great when you look at the Gospels because you begin to see lots of stories about the themes that you can then use and bring into. So you're not just talking about Jesus dying for us. You can talk about how Jesus wants to make a difference in your life, and you can use this little Bible story. So I'm introducing people to Jesus. So at the end of the evening, I then do an appeal. And I say to people, if you said yes to God this evening, come and see me. I've got a booklet I'd love to give you. It's actually this little booklet that I offer people, the journey booklet. And so I'm stood there with my booklet. I'm on the door. And this lady, probably 26, 27 years old, comes to see me. And she said, oh, Mark, can I have one of your booklets, please? I said, yeah, of course you can, of course you can. Did you say yes to God this evening? She said, oh, no. I said yes to God 2 years ago. I said, oh, that's fine. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh, she's given her life back to God. By the way, the reports right across the nation are that more and more people are coming back to God. And I'm seeing that. When I preach the gospel, I'm seeing loads of people coming back to God. So I'm going to write a book at some point called Yes Again. Because it's a different set of needs, isn't it? when somebody comes back to God, there's some different things. There's some familiar and similar things. But I don't know where you are. I don't know you all enough to know what your understanding of things like prophecy and prophetic are. So I'll be very careful. But there has been a lot of prayer and prophetic words about prodigals coming back. And it's happening. It's happening. I think we can rejoice and be a little bit excited about it. So I thought, well, maybe she was giving her life back to God. Thought that's what was happening. So I said to her, so I gave her the booklet. She said, oh, that's great. So I said, did this evening help you in any way? She said, oh, yeah, I said yes to Christianity this evening. I thought, okay. It was beginning to piece together in my mind. And I could get my head around that because often people say, didn't need that, often people say yes to theism. If they're an atheist or agnostic, they'll say yes to theism, belief in God, before they say yes to Christianity. C.S. Lewis said yes to theism, and it was another 2 years until he said yes to becoming a Christian. So I could understand that. I could get my head around that. So I said to her, oh, that's great that you've said yes to Jesus dying on the cross for you and taking the punishment. Oh, I didn't do that. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking, there is a link. Are you with me on that? There's definitely a link, isn't there, between saying yes to Christianity and yes to Jesus. It's pretty tricky, like dividing the two. But you see, here's the thing, and I think this is where we've got to be a little bit careful, particularly for people who've been Christians for years and doing this evangelism stuff for years. We see it on block. But people, when they're journeying, yeah, I can get my head around that. But I'm struggling with that. And that's why if you're not saying yes to God, you're saying no, what we're not doing is celebrating what bit they are believing in, what bit they are embracing. And we end up like treating them all the same way. Whereas actually we want to, well, it's great that you believe in that. But, so, I mean, what do you do with that woman? Can I have my booklet back? You can't say that, can you? It's not the done thing. So I just simply said to her, I said, oh, look, it's great that you said yes to God 2 years ago. And I said, it's great that you said yes to Christianity this evening. But my encouragement to you would be, don't leave it too long before you say yes to Jesus. Because saying yes to Jesus will make sense of the saying yes to Christianity and the saying yes to God that you did 2 years ago. Does that make sense? I got an email from her 2 years later. She obviously worked in twos. She said, hey, Mark, just to let you know, I finally said yes to Jesus and I'm getting baptized in 3 weeks' time. Hey, we like that, don't we? We like that. Now, for me, I've never once, I'm not saying they're not out there, but I've never once met somebody who went to bed an atheist and woke up wanting to become a Christian. I'm not saying they're not out there. I'm just saying I've not met them. And I travel about 30,000 miles a year, working right across the churches since 1988. That's when I started Odge. 1988. You'd have thought I'd have met one or two, wouldn't you? But what I have met is people like that lady who've taken years and years and years. And so I think it's really, really important that we understand that journey and seek to let our understanding of that journey inform how we share our faith with people. And what is really good about this is if we can learn to understand that and pass that on, you will find it will liberate the Christians that you're trying to teach about helping their friends become Jesus. Because there's an idea out there that it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. People still think evangelism doesn't work. And that's for all sorts of reasons. These are some of the reasons that I learned when I was learning how to share my faith. These were on some slides. They might have been... Do anybody remember those PowerPoint slides in full colour that Mark Howe produced back in the day? One or two of you who were around then. Okay, and there's various reasons why evangelism doesn't work. I'm not going to unpack these. These are just some of the ones that I learned when I was doing my training in evangelism that I took seriously. and started to address in my own life, and I teach people these, I think we can distort the Christian message. Unintentionally, but we can distort it. The danger with thematic preaching, thematic evangelistic preaching, is we can say things like, if we're preaching on love, we talk about give your life to Jesus and you'll receive his love, which is totally true, but we're not really asking people to give their life to Jesus just to receive something. People are giving their life to Jesus because they need to. They need his forgiveness. There's a separation. So the problem with thematic evangelistic preaching, we can end up just distorting things. Okay, I think there's bad methods. We know enough of those. So here's a little challenge to those of us who've been using new methods for 30 years. They're not new methods anymore. They were new methods then, but they're not, just because we've been using them ever since, they're not new methods anymore. And they're not necessarily good methods anymore. I'm not saying that what you're doing is bad methods. What I'm saying is, I don't want to become somebody who once used good methods, has been doing them for 35 years, and they're no longer good methods, but I haven't realized it. I hope we're big enough and spiritual enough and mature enough in our ministry to say, do you know what? I got to lay that down. I got to lay that down. Even the Holy Grail, sketchboards. I'm not saying I don't use it, so this is my little get out clause here. I don't use it, so I don't know whether it still is a good. I'm just using that as an example. I said I was going to nibble a little bit. I'm not saying it's a bad method, by the way. Please don't misunderstand. If you think that I'm saying it's a bad method and I find out, I will hunt you down, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm wanting to do is I want to drop something into you and say, if we're not careful, those of us who were once good method people are now bad method people, because we haven't understood how things have changed and we haven't tweaked along the way. So I just throw that out as a challenge. And that doesn't mean that everything from the past we leave in the past. But what it might mean is, as we bring it into the now, we might have to tweak it a bit, change it a little bit, do something a bit different. So again, with our street work and our open air work, with our door-to-door work works. I became a Christian through door-to-door work. My whole family. But we've got to do things a bit differently. You know that, really. So because we want to keep making sure that we are really communicating the gospel relevantly, don't we? So there's a lack of motivation in the church, isn't there, when it comes to evangelism? I think there's a lack of love as well. I think we can come across with a lack of love, but I think sometimes we do have a lack of love. I think there's a lack of God's power. Do you remember back in the day how we used to talk about holiness? We don't talk about that anymore because it's legalistic. Well, to be fair, in Pentecostal circles that I'm from, it was quite legalistic. Holiness became more about what you needed to stop doing than what you should be doing. Don't go to the cinema, for example. I think we've got to be clean vessels, haven't we? We've got to be clean vessels. I'm Mark Greenwood. I'm not as clean a vessel as I need to be. Anybody else? We've got to get holy. And answers on a postcard to that one. But I think we've got to become holy, be clean. Our devotional life. And I'm not holding myself up as the example of all that is godly. What I'm saying is these are all my challenges that I take on as an evangelist as I want to become more effective. I do think we've got a wrong understanding of success. You know enough about the Engels scale. I'm sure if you don't, Google it and find out. But I do think we have a wrong understanding of success when it comes to evangelism. I don't know if you've ever felt this pressure, but there used to be a bit of a thing where, and I received invitations, oh Mark, we want a mission because we need to see some people come to Christ. You ever heard that? Want a mission because we need to see some people come to Christ. The implication of we're going to wheel in an evangelist. That's a lot of pressure for you and me. It's a huge amount of pressure. And I would say a couple of things on that. I challenge churches on that. I said, if you want to wheel in an evangelist, at least do it for biblical reasons, which is to equip the church. Nowhere in the Bible, there's only 3 definitions of the evangelist anyway, isn't there, in the Bible? One's Philip, one's the Ephesians 4, and then there's the one that says, do the work of the evangelist, which in the Greek literally says, whatever you do, do it as if you were an evangelist. So if you're a nurse, do it as if you're an evangelist. The only definition we really get to see is the Ephesians 4 one, which is, what is it about? It's equipping, isn't it? So by all means, wheel in an evangelist, but get them equipping. So I think it's an unhealthy model. We'll wheel in the evangelist. So I think it's problematic, but I also think it's crazy because I think I understand that the Bible says that he's the Lord of the harvest, not me. Isn't he? And I honestly, I am sure you've done this as well. When you've not seen people come to Christ, when you've been out and done a hard slog, or you've preached at an event and the pressure's been on, we're getting you in to see people come to Christ and nobody becomes a Christian. I have beat myself up in the early days. What sin have I committed? Well, to be honest with you, a lot. But that's not the reason. Didn't pray enough. Well, that's true. It's like every other week with Jesus, isn't it? Some of our prayer lives. Not every day. But that's not it. He's the Lord of the harvest. And I think we've got to be careful about, I don't like the word metrics, but I think we've got to be careful what metrics we use for how effective we are or aren't. Because you can see people come to Christ and it doesn't mean you're effective as an evangelist. It just means the Lord of the harvest is working through you. Equally, you might not see anybody come to Christ, but it doesn't mean you're ineffective as an evangelist. Because the responsibility is, how can I best function and communicate as an evangelist? What can I do on my part to make sure that I'm the best evangelist that I can be? And this scripture really, really radically, I've got to be so disciplined because I could say so much just on this passage myself. I think it's an incredible passage. In the book of Acts, you get 3 accounts of Paul's conversion. In Acts 9, you get it as it happened. It's like the movie, isn't it? When he was on the road, when it happened. And then Acts 22, where he's stood up in like a public place, in a marketplace, and he's sharing his story. And then in Acts 26, where he's now giving his testimony as a form of defense. He's being accused, and here he is. And it's really interesting. In Acts 26:28, then Agrippa said to Paul, do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to become a Christian? Now, a few things have happened just before this. Paul's sharing his testimony. Festus, he's kicking off. He is not happy. He shouts, you're out of your mind, Paul. Your learning is driving you insane. And Paul says, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus. Now notice this lovely response. Festus is saying you're out of your mind. We have to understand that people out there in the world think we're bonkers. Let's not fool ourselves. Let's be realistic about it. Not only will people not accept our message, they think we're absolutely, as my mother would say, start raving bonkers. So we have to understand that's out there. You're out of your mind. Your learning has driven you insane. I'm not out of my mind. Now notice Paul's response. Most excellent Festus. That most excellent Festus title is a way that a normal everyday human person would have addressed like a diplomat. So it's a real respectful phrase. So how respectful are we when we're communicating the gospel? Really important, isn't it, that we respect people when we're communicating the gospel. I'm not out of my mind. What I am saying, most excellent festival, is true. What's the next line? And reasonable. True and reasonable. Now, in the church, we've not always been very, very good at showing why our faith is reasonable. Historically, we've been fairly good at speaking the truth of it. I think we need to ramp up a bit more on that bit, don't you? I think we've got to recover some stuff and stop compromising on some stuff and go again with the truth in a relevant way, but showing that our faith is reasonable. And that can only be done within the context of journeying with somebody. That's why I think it's so important, this journey. What I'm saying is reasonable and true. And then he goes back and talks to King Agrippa again. And then this is where Agrippa then says, do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to become a Christian? Now, the King James Version puts it slightly more poetically and majestically, arguably, but it's actually slightly less accurately. Most of the translations actually translate it this way, which scholars seem to suggest is the more accurate translation. But I do like how the King James says it, almost thou persuadest me. It does have some gravitas to it, doesn't it? It really does. But the more accurate translation is, do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to become a Christian? So do you think in such a short time you can persuade people to become a Christian? On the streets, in the schools. That's why relationship's so important. That's why we've got to keep going. And then look at Paul's response. I think this is absolutely beautiful. Paul replied, short time or long. Short time or long. I like that commitment, don't you? We're not very good. Some of the people in our churches are not very good. I've heard people say things like, I've given up on my friend because they don't respond. What? They're not some target to practice on. They're not some statistic. They're not responding, so I'm going to stop being with them. Paul says short time or long. So first thing, be patient. But then look at this. Short time or long, I pray. Be patient, but be prayerful. I'm a little bit of an activist, not in a dodgy way. And I've got to ramp up on my prayer life a bit, really. Anybody else a little bit guilty of that? We're really good at doing, but not quite so good at praying. Yeah, just a few of us with our hands up. The rest are what I call liars. We need to ramp up on the prayer stuff, don't we? Let's be really, really. Now, there might be some of you that have got that. And I've found in the church, you've got two camps. You've got people who are really prayerful but do nothing. And you've got people who do everything but not so prayerful. And what we want is to meet in the middle. We want to be really prayerful and do something, as we say up north. We want to do something. So be patient and be prayerful. But then I love this. Because this, I've got to be disciplined. Because I love this passage. What I love about this, in the face of this opposition, he's respectful. He turns back round, speaks to the king. Short time or long, patience, prayerful. But look at this. I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today will become as I am, except for these chains. I like the faith there, don't you? Be faith-filled. Be faith-filled. Some of you need a fresh dose of faith. Some of you will be disheartened and discouraged. Maybe you've had some opposition. Don't let it set you back. Be patient. Be prayerful. Be reasonable. Be truthful. But be faith-filled. Because Paul didn't go, oh, yeah, now you mention it. Step back a little bit. And I love that his response wasn't even just, all right, Agrippa, I got this. I'm going to pray to God that you become a Christian. No, his faith went beyond that, didn't it? I pray to God that not only you, but all those here listening to me today. I need a bit of a faith lift, my friend says sometimes. He doesn't say I need a faith lift. He says he needs a faith lift. Anybody need a bit of a faith lift for their ministry? I wonder whether maybe that might be something that's a determination in our hearts as you go away from this weekend, that you sort of set your sail again, that you set your face like flint, that you go and have this faith lift and you believe again. And I'm not saying that you won't feel down again, because actually we've got to constantly have Jesus lift us up and fill us up with a bit of faith. But I think this scripture is such an incredible scripture. And what's really fascinating with this, when you look at the life of Saul with his conversion, when you look at what took place, it's really, really interesting. Have you heard people stand up and say something along the lines of this, say in a baptismal service, where they'll say something like, well, it wasn't a blinding flash of light for me. Have you heard that one? And even those who are slightly more biblically literate might say, well, my experience wasn't a Damascus Road experience. Have you heard that? And of course, what they mean is that it wasn't this big, magnificent encounter moment. And what they mean is it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in that moment. But I want to suggest to you that Saul's conversion was not a Damascus Road experience. Yeah. Geographically, I'll give you that. Geographically, it was a Damascus Road. It says it in the book. So we have to go with that. But what we interpret that to be isn't what it actually was. Because Saul was a believer. He wasn't a follower of the way. We know that. But he was fiercely monotheistic, as were his parents. He was schooled under Gamaliel, one of the most prestigious teachers. So he believed in God, didn't he? He didn't believe in Jesus, but he believed in God. And so we can't equate these blinding flashes of light with somebody coming from being a non-believer to a believer, because arguably he was there somewhere in that whole sort of narrative arc of faith. And what's really interesting is when you look through, and I can't remember which version of it is. It might be this one, verse 14, possibly in this narrative here, where he's saying he's having this interaction with Jesus, and Jesus says to him, Saul, Saul, it's impossible for you to kick against the goads. Familiar with that phrase? A goad, for those of you who don't know what a goad is. A goad, it was an agricultural implement, actually similar in shape and size to a pool cue. Not massively dissimilar. And so it was fatter at one end and a little bit more pointed at the other end. And what would happen with a goad is that when an oxen had an heavy load on it and didn't want to get up and move, a little bit like a teenager, you know what I mean, when they don't want to get up and move. And what would happen, sorry about that, by the way, okay, what would happen is the farmhand would just gently prod the oxen, wouldn't hit it with the fat end, like one big fell swoop. It'd gently nudge it. You've heard of it, haven't you, when people were goaded? And it was like the straw that breaks, isn't it? It's like they finally caved in. Not because of one event, but because they were goading them. And the notion here with the oxen is that it becomes more comfortable to get up and move than it is to stay where it is. And that's why so often you hear people, and you think, why are they not becoming jolly Christians? I've preached the gospel. I've known there were non-Christians in there. I've seen them nodding all the way through. Some of you will have done it as well. Nodding all the way through my evangelistic talk. Even when I'm preaching, in our words, about sin. Even when I'm preaching that, you can see it all over them. And you make an appeal. And they don't appear to become a Christian. It's like, what is wrong with you? And then all of a sudden, through what might seem an inconspicuous moment, they might just suddenly become a Christian. In my own church, I did a course, Reason to Believe, and this atheist came on it and came onto loads of stuff. And for about 4 or 5 years, and he gently nudged along. I had conversations with him when we'd done the Jesus night, and he was tears in his eyes, and his wife's there, and his daughter's there. And I said, mate, you do know you're going to have to do this, don't you? You're going to have to do this. He went, yeah, I know. I said, well, why don't you do it now? Because I felt like he needed the nudge. Oh, I'll do it. It was another 1.5 years later. They made an announcement at church, if anybody wants to get baptized, let us know. We'd love to baptize you. So he went to see the pastor at the end. And then the pastor said to him, oh, when are you going to give your life to Christ? He went, oh, I did it. And his wife's looking at him. No, you haven't. Because that's what wives do, innit? No, he didn't do that. He never. Yeah, I did. Well, I didn't know about it. Well, I haven't told you. Which is a very dangerous thing, isn't it? It's a very dangerous thing. And in like 6 months before, he was just sat in his sitting room and he just thought to himself, yeah, I think I might do it now. He's like, what's that about? And it's just like the goading, isn't it? It's just the nibbling away, the nudging, and then finally he kind of gives his life to Christ. And that was certainly Saul's experience. We know the Lord was nudging him. We can have a sanctified imagination as to what might have been. Some scholars have suggested that Saul's sister had come to Christ. Okay, don't know. I don't know either way. We know that he was present at the stoning of Stephen, don't we? So was that something that he saw then? We know that he and Jesus were around at the same time, give or take. So we know he knew about the influence of Jesus because, it's mad, isn't it? This day he'd got some special permission to kill a few more Christians. So we know that he knew about the influence of Jesus, and he saw that as a threat, didn't he? So he was trying to kind of eradicate it. And I tell you what, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, that sometimes the people that seem the most angry and vehemently against Christ, often there's something going on under the surface. I'm sure you've had those conversations on the streets, and it's only when you've spent a chunk of time with them and they calm down that you begin to realize and discover. Maybe, I don't know. A bit of conjecture here, and a little bit of sanctified imagine / message translation here. Maybe there was something happening in there that he was killing the Christians. Maybe that was linked with so being confronted with the reality. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is we know that something was happening, that the Lord was goading him. And then, of course, on this night, who does he see? Well, not Jesus per se, but the crucified, risen Jesus. And I think when you look at the life of Paul, it is a great example often as how people come to faith. There is reasoning going on. There is this exposure about Jesus, and then there's these encounter moments. But then note what's really interesting, because the story doesn't really end there. Saul has this encounter moment, and then he goes and has a one-on-one with somebody. The journey continues. If that was a mission in today's culture, and he has this blinding flash of light, would say, he's in. But actually, he had to go away and have a one-on-one, didn't he, with somebody? And then he had a one-on-few. So he had a one-on-one mentor. Then he was in a small group. And was it Pete we were chatting about 2 or 3 years before he went out, wasn't it, and started to kind of preach. So I think there's a lot to learn, because I think, and we'll sort of land this session, because we've got, is it a break now we've got, isn't it? I've not got it right, okay. We'll land this session. Have you noticed that everybody's on a journey these days? I'm not on a diet, I'm on a weight loss journey. And there is a right question to ask. Are we just selling out to a cultural trend when we talk about faith being a journey? Or actually, is it true? And I want to suggest to you it's more than just a buzzword. In actual fact, if you look back through the church, the early church, and how it grew, it grew really by people journeying with people. They created a thing called catechesis, because people were, as Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire like wildfire, a lot of people were making unhelpful judgments about it. And so the early church said, well, look, come and explore. Get to know us, see why we do what we do, why we believe what we believe, why we act like we act. Come and explore with us and then make your decision. I find it interesting that Jesus invited the disciples on a bit of a 3-year journey. At what point did the disciples become Christians? That's an interesting one, isn't it? I think we could theologically debate that for a long time. But he invited them because he said, come follow me and I will make you So it was never about that one moment, was it? It was about, let me take you on a journey. And when churches say to me, Jesus never did any follow-up, I'm thinking, that's pretty major. 3 years intense, like nearly every day, all day, with people that he'd called to follow them, because it's that journey, isn't it? It's that journey. And actually what Jesus did was what rabbis did. They saw the potential. So when Jesus is walking along the shore and he sees these fishermen, and it says immediately they left their nets to follow him. Do you know why they did it immediately? Because this was their dream. This was their dream, that the rabbi would say, come follow me. Because when a rabbi said, come follow me, it's because he saw in you the potential to become like him. And he wanted to invite you onto what ended up being a 3-year journey, interestingly enough. So there's that journey, that process. So I think journey is not just a buzzword. I think it's the operating system of evangelism. So how can you begin to look at what you're doing, and how can you begin to journey with people? And that's really what the big yes, yes, healthy maybe language is all about. Giving people an opportunity to say a big yes, or a little yes to explore, or a healthy maybe. And I think in some ways we've got to look at how we can do that better. Now that's what I'm trying to build into Elim Pentecostal churches, with some other stuff, which we might have a little look at in the second session. I'm trying to build this journey-based stuff into our churches, because Pentecostals have all been very much like, now, do it now, Lord, push you, do it now. Do it now. And when it doesn't happen now, we say silly things like, well, it's done in the heavenlies. All right. Well, it may well be done in the heavenlies, but we've got to get patient and we've got to get prayerful when it comes to our evangelism. And I think that's something that we need to build back into us, isn't it? As well as back into the people we're trying to inspire